Hello, and a very warm welcome to this explainer on behalf of Pratimoksha, Dubai's premier yoga studio. Today, we're diving into a deeply important, yet honestly, often overlooked dimension of wellness education. We're going to be sharing our core philosophy on the profound inner work required to truly teach yoga. We'll be looking way beyond the physical postures, the asanas, and exploring what yoga philosophy actually demands of us as educators. So let's jump right in and see what it takes to guide others, not just with physical expertise, but with a refined and disciplined mind.
To really ground our understanding today, I want to start with a foundational insight from our founder, Lalitha Viswanath. As we often teach at Pratimoksha, practicing yoga tests patience with your own body, but teaching it tests patience with someone else's. And what's really fascinating about this is how clearly it establishes our whole perspective. Teaching yoga is a remarkably rigorous discipline of the mind. It's not just about the body. A teacher can spend years being absolutely calm and disciplined on their own mat, right? But the real challenge, that begins the literal second they stand at the front of the room. It's a completely different dynamic.
Which brings us to our first main topic, the true test of teaching, or as we see it, confronting the ego in the classroom. To really understand this test, we turn to classical yogic texts, specifically Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. At our studio, we view Patanjali's yamas, those 5 ethical restraints, not just as abstract, dusty rules to think about in isolation, but as active, breathing practices. They are meant to be practiced in relationship with other people. When you're standing there, watching a room full of Dubai's busy professionals or retirees straining unnecessarily through a pose, well, you suddenly discover exactly how much of your own ego is tied up in wanting to fix it for them. The yamas basically become your essential toolkit for navigating that incredibly delicate relationship between teacher and student.
Let's move on and see how this builds, focusing on a crucial yama known as Asteya and how it applies to honoring student discovery.
So in classical yoga philosophy, Asteya is defined quite simply as non-stealing. It's one of those 5 core principles of ethical restraint. But you might be wondering, how on earth does a rule against theft apply the moment you step off your own mat and stand in front of a class to teach? Well, there's a brilliant difference between ancient theory and modern classroom reality. While the literal translation is taking a physical object that doesn't belong to you, in our Pratimoksha application, it actually means stealing the moment of a student's own understanding and discovery. Let me paint a picture for you. In our experience, every single teacher eventually faces a student wobbling through a balance pose. They are clearly just one breath away from finding stability all on their own. And every teacher feels that intense, magnetic pull to step in, adjust their hip, correct their gaze, and basically just hand them the solution. But stepping in too early to save them from the discomfort of struggling, you are quietly taking something away from them. You're literally replacing their hard-earned moment of realization with your version of the answer.
The absolutely crucial realization here is that restraint is not passivity. It is waiting long enough for someone else's insight to actually be theirs. The realization that arrives after a genuine struggle truly belongs to the person who struggled for it. And this is exactly why we spend a significant amount of time on this very subtle line in our RYT 200 teacher training course. It's a boundary that most new teachers cross without even noticing, and usually out of pure kindness rather than ego. But true restraint allows the student a genuine, unstolen realization.
Now, let's explore the second and honestly often more uncomfortable yama we focus on when training educators, aparigraha, and the release of the teacher's ego. Aparigraha is the classical yogic principle of non-possessiveness, or non-attachment. Now, while that sounds beautiful in theory, applying it demands a level of inner detachment that very few typical certifications actually prepare instructors for. This is where teaching gets genuinely uncomfortable.
While literally it means not hoarding material possessions, in our studio application, it means not possessing a student's admiration and not holding on to their progress as your own. You see, in Dubai's tight-knit wellness community, whether you're teaching in El Safa, Jumeirah, or right here at our studio in Oud Metha, teachers build followings. Students return, they credit their teacher with their personal change. The hidden danger here is that the teacher can unconsciously start wanting that dependency to continue. I mean, being needed feels good. It can start to feel like evidence of your own worth. But aparigraha asks you to not possess your students' loyalty. To help our teachers out, we use a bit of a diagnostic checklist of warning signs that aparigraha might be broken. Let's walk through these together. First, feeling subtly threatened when a student attends another teacher's class. Second, framing their progress around what you gave them rather than what they built. Third, feeling discomfort when a long-term student is finally ready for independent practice. Fourth, measuring your teaching success strictly by attendance numbers or personal praise. And finally, treating class feedback that didn't quite land as a personal threat rather than helpful information. And look, I want to be super clear here. Exhibiting these subtle ego patterns absolutely does not make someone a bad person. It merely makes them human. These are exactly the patterns yoga philosophy has spent centuries naming, specifically because they are so incredibly easy to fall into. Which brings us to a fundamental question, and I want you to just sit in the stillness of this thought for a moment. How do we actually measure success when our ultimate goal is to not be needed? Because properly understood, a teacher's success is measured by how capable a student becomes of practicing without them, not by how attached that student remains. So, how do we put this into practice? We can look to Lalitha Viswanath's philosophy, built over 19 years of cultivating student independence. At Pratimoksha, a teacher's ego is treated as something to actively work against rather than indulge. For over 19 years here in Dubai, Lalitha has beautifully and deliberately modeled this. Longtime students frequently note a very unusual quality about her. She demonstrates genuine joy, not insecurity, when a student's practice deepens to the point where they actually need less guidance. She wants their growth more than their loyalty. This is a deliberate, daily application of aparigraha. And fascinatingly, by holding her students loosely, they end up staying with the studio for years. Trust naturally grows toward teachers who aren't quietly trying to possess it. Which leads us to our final section, mastering the inner work, which we often call the harder half of the job. When people enter a teacher training program, they so often expect the inner work to be secondary to mastering the physical postures. But in our view, philosophy is not an accessory to teaching technique. It is the core curriculum. Confronting your instinct to control, to be needed, and to be the source of someone else's transformation, that is the real work. That's why we weave this directly into our teachings, like our dhyana meditation workshop. It provides a structured, deliberate way for teachers and dedicated practitioners to observe their own ego patterns in real time. Because noticing these things without deliberate practice, it's incredibly difficult. I'll leave you with this final provocative thought. Are you ready to confront your own ego and discover what true teaching really demands of you? The physical postures, well, they're just the beginning. The real discipline happens within. If you're weighing a training path and want to understand how this philosophical inner work is actually built into a curriculum, rather than just mentioned once and forgotten, we warmly invite you to reach out to our Outmatha studio. Let's talk it through and take that next step together. Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer on the inner work of teaching at Pratimoksha.